3 weeks after their midnight conversation, Meghan stood before a wall of cameras and microphones in a conference room at a Santa Barbara hotel. The room was packed with journalists from around the world, all waiting to hear what many suspected would be one of the most significant announcements in modern royal history. Behind her calm exterior, Meghan felt a profound sense of liberation that had been building since the day she first held Lilibet's birth certificate. Harry sat in the front row, his presence offering silent support for what was about to unfold. After weeks of private discussions, legal consultations, and difficult phone calls with family members across the Atlantic, they had arrived at this moment together. While Harry had ultimately chosen to retain his titles while supporting his wife's decision, his solidarity was unwavering. The statement Meghan was about to read had been crafted carefully over many revisions. It needed to be respectful to the royal family, while being absolutely clear about her intentions. It needed to explain her reasoning without appearing to criticize the institution itself. Most importantly, it needed to reflect her authentic voice rather than the diplomatic language that had characterized so many royal communications. "Good morning," Meghan began, her voice steady and confident. "I'm here today to share some personal news about my family and my future. As many of you know, my daughter Lilibet Diana was born on June 4th of this year. What you may not know is that her birth certificate reflects a conscious choice I made about how I want my children to understand their identity." She paused, allowing the journalists to process this opening before continuing. The room was absolutely silent except for the soft clicking of cameras capturing every moment of what they sensed was historic testimony. On Lilibet's birth certificate, my name appears simply as Rachel Meghan Markle, without any reference to royal titles or status. This was not an oversight or administrative error. It was a deliberate choice that represents something much larger than a single document. The explanation that followed covered the journey that had led to this decision. Meghan spoke about her love and respect for the royal family, particularly Queen Elizabeth II, while also acknowledging that her own path required a different relationship with royal tradition. She emphasized that this choice was about authenticity and personal integrity rather than rejection or disrespect. "Today, I am formally announcing my intention to renounce my HRH title and the designation of Duchess of Sussex. This decision comes after careful consideration and extensive discussions with my husband and legal advisors. I am grateful for the honor these titles represented, but I believe the time has come for me to continue my life's work without the constraints that come with formal royal status." The questions that followed were intense and probing. Journalists asked about the Queen's reaction, about the impact on Harry's own royal status, and about what this meant for their children's future relationships with the royal family. Meghan answered each question with the same directness that had characterized her announcement, refusing to be drawn into speculation or criticism of other family members. One reporter asked whether this decision meant she was divorcing the royal family entirely. Meghan's response was perhaps the most revealing moment of the entire press conference. She explained that family relationships exist independently of titles and official roles, and that her love and respect for Harry's relatives would continue regardless of her formal status within the institution. The most emotional moment came when a journalist asked about her children's future. Meghan's voice softened as she explained that both Archie and Lilibet would grow up understanding their heritage while having the freedom to choose their own relationship with royal tradition. The birth certificate, she explained, was just one way of ensuring that choice remained open to them. Behind the scenes, the reaction from Buckingham Palace had been carefully managed. While privately there was disappointment and concern about the precedent this might set, publicly the palace had issued a brief statement expressing understanding for Meghan's decision and emphasizing that she would always be considered a valued member of the extended royal family. The Queen herself had been informed of the decision during a private phone call between Harry and his grandmother. According to sources close to the palace, Her Majesty had listened carefully to Harry's explanation and expressed sadness about the situation while acknowledging that every individual must follow their own conscience. The conversation had ended with mutual expressions of love and respect. In the weeks following the announcement, public reaction was predictably divided. Supporters praised Meghan's courage and authenticity, while critics accused her of attention-seeking and disrespect for tradition. Social media exploded with debates about modern monarchy, personal freedom, and the price of marrying into the royal family. But for Meghan herself, the most important reactions came from her immediate family. Archie, now old enough to understand some of what was happening, seemed relieved that the constant discussion of titles and protocols might finally decrease. Lilibet, of course, remained blissfully unaware of the historical significance of her birth certificate, focusing instead on the important work of learning to crawl and explore her world. Harry found himself in a unique position as the supportive husband of someone who had formally separated herself from his family's institution. The decision brought them closer together in some ways, as it removed any remaining questions about Meghan's commitment to their life in California. At the same time, it required him to navigate relationships with relatives who struggled to understand his wife's choice. 6 months after the announcement, Meghan reflected on the decision while watching her children play in their garden. The media attention had eventually died down, replaced by other stories and controversies. What remained was a sense of personal integrity that she hadn't fully appreciated was missing until she reclaimed it. The birth certificate that had started everything remained in their family safe, along with other important documents. But its significance had evolved from a secret burden to a symbol of possibility. It represented the idea that identity could be chosen rather than simply inherited, that tradition could be respected while still being questioned, and that even the most established institutions could coexist with individual authenticity. Legal proceedings to formalize the renunciation of her titles continued behind the scenes, involving complex discussions about precedent and protocol. But the public announcement had already accomplished what Meghan most desired: clarity about who she was and what she stood for, independent of any role or title granted by others. As she tucked Lilibet into bed that evening, Meghan whispered the same words she had been saying since her daughter's birth. "You can be anyone you choose to be." The difference now was that those words felt completely true, backed up by actions rather than just hopes. The birth certificate had been revealed, the HRH title had been renounced, and the future stretched ahead, full of possibilities that belonged entirely to them. In choosing authenticity over expectation, Meghan had not just changed her own life, but had opened up new conversations about what it meant to be connected to tradition while remaining true to personal values. The story that began with a simple document had become something much larger, a testament to the power of choosing your own identity in a world that often prefers to choose it for you. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 10 o'clock as Meghan finally approached Harry in their living room. He was reading on the couch, a cup of chamomile tea growing cold on the side table beside him. The children had been asleep for over an hour, and the house had settled into the peaceful quiet that had become their sanctuary. Harry looked up from his book, immediately sensing the gravity in his wife's expression. In their 5 years together, he had learned to read the subtle changes in her demeanor, and tonight something felt different, purposeful, and slightly nervous, like the night before she had decided to speak publicly about their struggles with royal life. "We need to talk," Meghan said softly, settling beside him on the couch with the folder containing Lilibet's birth certificate. "About Lily, about us, about what comes next." Harry closed his book and gave her his full attention. The lamp cast warm shadows across their faces as Meghan opened the folder and withdrew the official document. She had rehearsed this conversation in her mind dozens of times, but now that the moment had arrived, she chose to speak from the heart rather than follow any script. "I need to show you something that might surprise you," she began, handing him the birth certificate. "Look at how my name appears on Lily's birth registration." Harry examined the document carefully, his brow furrowing as he processed what he was seeing. The absence of any royal title or reference to the Duchess of Sussex was immediately apparent. For several moments, he said nothing, simply studying the paper as if he could understand the implications through closer examination. "You requested this?" he asked finally, his voice neutral but clearly processing complex emotions. Meghan nodded, then began to explain the thinking behind her decision. She talked about the weight of expectations that came with royal titles, the way those expectations had affected every aspect of their lives, and her growing desire to give their children a choice about their own identities. The birth certificate was her way of ensuring that Lilibet would never feel trapped by circumstances beyond her control. As she spoke, Harry listened without interrupting, occasionally glancing down at the document as if seeing it anew. His own relationship with royal titles was complicated, born into them. He had never known life without the weight of expectation and protocol. Meghan's perspective offered him a glimpse of a different possibility, one that both excited and unsettled him. "There's something else," Meghan continued, her voice growing stronger with conviction. "I've been thinking about formally renouncing my HRH title. Not just stepping back from royal duties, but actually giving up the title entirely." The words hung in the air between them like a bridge they could either cross together or watch collapse. Harry set the birth certificate aside and turned to face her fully, searching her expression for any sign of doubt or hesitation. What he saw instead was the same determination that had first attracted him to her, the courage to challenge convention when it conflicted with her values. "Tell me what you're thinking," he said quietly. "All of it." For the next hour, Meghan shared thoughts and feelings she had been processing alone for months. She talked about the difference between respect for tradition and imprisonment by it. She described her vision for their family's future, one where their children could choose their own paths without the burden of inherited obligations. Most importantly, she explained how keeping the HRH title felt increasingly like living a lie. Harry found himself thinking about his own mother, Princess Diana, and how she had struggled with similar questions about identity and authenticity within the royal framework. Diana had never formally renounced her title, but she had certainly redefined what it meant to be royal. Meghan was proposing something more radical, a complete separation from the institution that had shaped his entire life. "The media will have a field day," Harry said, thinking through the practical implications. "They'll say you're rejecting the Queen, rejecting our family, rejecting everything we represent." Meghan had anticipated this concern. "They'll say what they want to say regardless of what we do. They've already painted me as ungrateful and manipulative. But this isn't about them or their narratives. This is about being honest about who I am and who I want to be for our children." The conversation shifted to the technicalities of such a decision. Royal titles, they both knew, were not simply handed back like library books. The process would involve discussions with the palace, legal consultations, and, inevitably, public announcements that would be scrutinized and debated endlessly. But Meghan had already begun researching the precedents and procedures. Harry stood and walked to the window overlooking their garden. The security lights illuminated the landscape they had created together, a space that reflected their personalities rather than royal expectations. Looking at this life they had built, he began to understand why Meghan felt the need to make their separation from royal life complete and official. "What about me?" he asked, turning back to face her. "Are you asking me to give up my titles too?" This was the question Meghan had been dreading and hoping for simultaneously. She had no desire to pressure Harry into a decision that felt wrong for him, but she also knew that their family's future would be affected by his choice. She explained that this was her decision to make for herself, but that she hoped he would consider what kind of example they wanted to set for Archie and Lilibet. The discussion continued past midnight, touching on everything from their financial independence to their relationships with Harry's family members. They talked about the practical benefits of completely separating from royal protocols and the emotional costs of making such a public break. Throughout the conversation, both remained committed to honesty and respect for each other's perspectives. By the time they finally went to bed, no final decisions had been made about Harry's titles, but both understood that Meghan's mind was made up about her own path forward. The birth certificate had been just the opening move in a larger game of defining their family's identity outside the constraints of royal expectation. As they lay in the darkness, Meghan felt a sense of relief she hadn't experienced in years. The secret was out, the conversation had happened, and Harry was still beside her, processing everything but not pulling away. Whatever came next, they would face it together, with their love for each other and their children as the only titles that truly mattered. The next morning would bring phone calls to lawyers and advisors, the beginning of a process that would ultimately reshape not just their lives, but public understanding of what it meant to be connected to the royal family in the modern world. But For now, in the quiet of their California bedroom, Meghan simply held Harry's hand and imagined the freedom that awaited them all. The summer heat in California was unbearable that July morning when Meghan Markle sat in her Montecito home office, surrounded by stacks of official documents. The morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows as she carefully reviewed papers that would soon change everything the public thought they knew about her daughter's birth. Lilibet Diana Mountbatten Windsor had been born on June 4, 2021, at Santa Barbara Cottage Hospital, but what the world didn't know was the complexity surrounding her birth registration. Meghan held the original birth certificate in her trembling hands, noting details that had been carefully omitted from the public announcement. The document revealed something extraordinary. Unlike her brother Archie, whose birth certificate listed both parents with their royal titles, Lilibet's certificate contained a peculiar notation. Under the section for parental information, Meghan's name appeared without any reference to her HRH status or the title of Duchess of Sussex. Instead, it simply read Rachel Meghan Markle, her birth name, as if the royal marriage had never occurred. This wasn't an accident or clerical error. Meghan had specifically requested this format during the registration process, but she had kept this decision secret from Harry for weeks. The weight of this choice had been building in her mind since before Lilibet's birth, representing something much larger than a simple administrative detail. As she sat there that morning, Meghan reflected on the journey that had led to this moment. The past 3 years had been a whirlwind of public scrutiny, family conflicts, and personal struggles that had fundamentally changed how she viewed her place in the world. The decision to step back from royal duties in 2020 had been just the beginning of a much deeper transformation. The birth certificate represented more than just documentation. It was a statement of independence, a declaration that her daughter would be raised differently than royal protocol might dictate. But Meghan knew that once this information became public, it would create a media storm that could affect not just her family, but the entire royal institution. Harry had been away that morning, taking Archie to his swimming lessons at their neighbor's private pool. The routine had become sacred to him. These quiet father-son moments away from the constant security presence and media attention. Meghan had chosen this time deliberately, knowing she needed space to process her thoughts before having the conversation that would reshape their family's future. The phone rang, interrupting her contemplation. It was her mother, Doria, calling from Los Angeles where she had been staying since Lilibet's birth to help with the transition. Doria's voice carried the wisdom of someone who had watched her daughter navigate impossible situations with grace and determination. "How are you feeling about everything today, sweetheart?" Doria asked, somehow sensing the weight of the moment without knowing the specific details. Meghan looked down at the birth certificate again, her finger tracing the line where her name appeared in simple black text. "I think I'm ready to make some big changes, Mom. Changes that might surprise everyone, including Harry." The conversation with her mother lasted nearly an hour, covering everything from Meghan's childhood dreams of independence to her current feelings about royal life. Doria had always encouraged her daughter to stay true to herself, even when that path seemed impossible or dangerous. This phone call reinforced Meghan's growing conviction that the time had come to make a stand. After hanging up, Meghan walked through her home, passing photographs that told the story of her transformation from actress to duchess to mother to something entirely new. The house felt different that day, not like a temporary refuge from royal life, but like the foundation of something permanent and authentic. She paused at Lilibet's nursery, where her daughter was napping peacefully. The room was decorated in soft pastels, with none of the formal royal imagery that might have been expected for a great-granddaughter of Queen Elizabeth II. Instead, it reflected Meghan's California aesthetic, natural materials, plenty of light, and a sense of freedom that extended far beyond interior design. Looking at her sleeping daughter, Meghan felt a surge of protective determination. She had already made the decision reflected on the birth certificate, but now she realized it was time to go further. The HRH title that had once seemed like such an honor now felt like a constraint, a reminder of expectations and traditions that no longer fit the life she wanted to build. The sound of Harry's car in the driveway broke the afternoon quiet. She could hear Archie's excited chatter as they returned from swimming, his voice full of the joy and innocence that she was determined to preserve. This was the family she had chosen, the life she had built through love rather than tradition, and she was ready to protect it at any cost. Meghan returned to her office and carefully placed the birth certificate in a secure folder. Tonight, after the children were asleep, she would show it to Harry and explain not just what she had already done, but what she planned to do next. The conversation would change everything, but she was finally ready for that change. As evening approached, Meghan prepared dinner while watching Harry play with both children in the garden. The scene looked so perfectly normal, so beautifully domestic, that it strengthened her resolve. This was real life, not the choreographed performances of royal engagements, but the genuine moments of family connection that she had craved since childhood. The birth certificate was just the beginning. What came next would require courage, conviction, and the willingness to disappoint people who had invested in a different version of her story. But as she watched her husband and children laugh together in the golden California light, Meghan knew she was ready to write her own story, starting with the truth about Lilibet Diana's birth and ending with her own rebirth as someone completely free.